Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 495. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. All right, everyone. I'm very excited to announce that the Trauma Therapist newsletter has finally launched. Yesterday, I sent it out to all the new subscribers. And if you're interested, you can check it out by going to the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. My goal here is to make this the go-to online resource for therapists of all kinds interested in learning about trauma and keeping up to date. Each month, we'll be looking at different modalities and conferences and events that are coming up, books and articles that are amazing, and also ones that are about to be published, workshops that are coming up. Each month, we're going to spotlight a seasoned therapist. This month, I'll just give you a little sneak peek. We're looking at spotlighting Lisa Ferenz, the amazing and inspiring Lisa Ferenz. What else? I'll even be doing a behind the scenes on what it takes to keep the podcast up and running and the newsletter up and running and the workshops up and running. Once again, if you're interested, check it out at the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Alyssa Scolari. Alyssa, welcome.
Hello, Guy. Thanks so much for having me.
You are welcome. So Alyssa is a speaker and psychotherapist treating adults and adolescents with trauma and eating disorders out of her independent practice in New Jersey, accompanied by her therapy dog, Noel, or is that Noel?
Noel. She was a Christmas present.
Okay. Many of Alyssa's speaking engagements are centered around the long-term physical and emotional impacts of trauma, as well as the hope that comes with making the decision to seek treatment. Alyssa is a trauma survivor herself and has made it her passion in life to help others on the road to recovery from trauma. In addition to her practice, Alyssa is also the host of the Light After Trauma podcast, which is meant to be an informative, inspirational, and safe space for those looking for support and connection as they navigate the difficult yet extremely rewarding journey of recovery. Well, look at you doing awesome and amazing things. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. So before we get going, where are you from originally? And share with our listeners where you're calling from now.
So I'm originally from South Jersey, born and raised in South Jersey.
Okay.
I live in like a little farm town, Hamilton, blueberry capital of the world. So my whole life I've been in Jersey.
Awesome. So let's get into it here. So talk to us, tell us a story about the trauma. Why are we sitting here talking about trauma from your perspective right now? What is it in your experience has led you here?
So my experience that has really developed and kind of fine-tuned my passion for trauma is really my own experience with trauma. So growing up, I always struggled with eating disordered behaviors. My earliest memories, I think I was probably 4 years old. And I remember hoarding butter, like sticks of butter, and sitting in my garage and just eating butter as like a 5-year-old. And I remember one time my mom found me, and I'll never forget it because of her reaction and all the shame that it brought on. Not that it's her fault. What else are you supposed to do when you find your child eating sticks of butter? But I had struggled with disordered eating my whole life, anywhere from anorexia to bulimia to binge eating. And then I got married in 2018.
So we're sitting on the floor eating butter, and then all of we're getting married.
Yep. So like, I'm speeding right ahead here.
I'm sure we'll hear the story. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. Can you hear that?
No.
You can't hear that? Okay, good. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So struggled with eating disorders my whole life, in and out of treatment. And then I met my husband, David. We got married in 2018, still was struggling with an eating disorder, couldn't understand what was going on. And shortly after we got married, we found out that the pastor who had married us was arrested on over, I think, almost 200 counts of child pornography. And he is now serving, I think, like 75 life sentences in jail. And at that moment, I started to become really, really sick. I started to not be able to get out of bed. I started not being able to sleep. And slowly but surely, I started to have these repressed memories come to the surface of moments of childhood and adult sexual abuse. And so for about 2 years now, I've been in the process of uncovering repressed memories. So that ultimately is what has changed my career. I thought I wanted to work with eating disorders. And then I realized what was underneath my eating disorder. And I said, oh, okay, now I need to shift things.
Wow. So this is recently, 2018.
Yep. It's recent.
So have you been able to determine how far things have gone back for you?
Yeah. So my sexual abuse started when I want to say around 4 or 5. I have memories as early as that. And then all the way up until probably about 2 years before I met my husband. So probably until I was about like 23 years old.
Okay. So let me just preface by saying, we're venturing into territory where you're starting to share things, and obviously, or not obviously, but don't feel compelled to share anything you don't feel comfortable sharing. I just want to say that at the outset here. And these more recent experiences when you were in your 20s, they were repressed also?
They were not so much necessarily repressed as I was able to say, well, I wanted it. Because at that point, right, in my early 20s, I became hypersexual because my whole life I had been abused. And then in 2012, I had studied abroad in Italy, and I had gone out to a club one night. I was 20 years old. I had gone out to a club one night. I was brutally sexually assaulted with another woman, and we were dropped off in an alley. And unfortunately, she did not make it. Mm-hmm. So I made it home somehow. And some of the pieces are still a little bit fuzzy to me, but I had repressed that. And then once I came home from studying abroad, from there, I remember all of the instances of sexual assault because it felt like I wanted it in the time. Like I made sense of it as in, oh, this is just who I am, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just a very hypersexual person. I just meet men in hotels and have sex with them. And I just let men do whatever they want, even though I tell them no. So I sort of rationalized it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So talk about how things shifted for you such that, you wanted to help other people during this whole process of recognizing what your own experience.
I have always wanted to help other people. So I read a book in the 8th grade called Almost Lost. And it was a story about an adolescent who was struggling with a drug addiction. And the book details his recovery or his journey through therapy. And I read it for a book report. And as soon as I finished the book, I said to my teacher, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And I never looked back. Uh-huh. So I always knew I was going to be a therapist in some way, shape, or form. But I had no idea that I was going to be a trauma therapist until I started working through my own trauma and uncovering my own repressed memories.
What's that experience been like for you, where you realize that you have these repressed memories, and how did you seek help in the wake of that? Were you like, oh my God, I'm having these memories, I've been abused. I need to seek help. What did you do?
It was so bad. I went into crisis mode where I was just having all of these memories flood back, and it's piece by piece. You don't ever really remember A to Z, but it's like having a 3,000 piece puzzle. And it's like, maybe 3 times a day you get like a ring on your doorbell and they give you one piece of the puzzle. And you're like, well, what the hell is this? How do I make sense of this? And it's confusing. And so I spent a lot of time over the last 2 years in just pure crisis mode, just trying to ground myself, figure out the difference between what's reality, what are flashbacks, what's dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a therapist at the time who helped me through that. She happened to specialize in trauma and eating disorders, and she helped me through that at the time. I no longer see her. I work with somebody else now who's a little bit more body focused, but at the time, my therapist was helping me get through like the crisis mode.
Wow. All right. So you switched from specializing or working with people with addictions, eating disorders, to now working with people who have experienced trauma, which might be one and the same in terms of people who have eating disorders. So in what context are you working as a therapist? Are you doing private practice? Are you working in a clinic, or what?
So what happened is I always knew I wanted to work with eating disorders. I had somehow found my way working with the police department. So I worked with the Gloucester Township Police Department, which is a bunch of different towns in South Jersey. And I was a counselor on their Juvenile and Family Services Bureau. Wow. So my goal was to prevent kids from getting caught up in the juvenile justice system. And I loved what I did. I always thought I wanted to work with eating disorders. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, this is great, but I still want to work with eating disorders. Well, what I was realizing is as I'm working with these kids who are constantly getting into trouble with the police, I'm bringing them into my office, I'm talking to them, and I'm realizing that 90% of them have a history of extensive complex trauma. I'm not talking, one instance of trauma. I'm talking a long history of trauma, and we know what that does to the brain. And I'm like, oh, trauma really is at the root of so much, even so much more than just like eating disorders. So it was at that moment, and this was, I want to say it was just over a year ago. So August 2019 was when I transitioned. I opened up my private practice. So I'm now in independent practice. I left the police department, and I have been in private practice for just over a year now.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
In terms of your own experience with therapists, so working with your own therapist, what worked for you? What were some of the things that your therapist did that quote unquote helped you or worked?
That's a really good question. And I think it's so individualized. And that's one of the, I think, mistakes that I made like early on in my career, is assuming that what would work for me would work for everybody else. But one of the things that my current therapist does that I really, really like is the body work, the instant, like what she calls biohacks for when the dissociation is taken over. So when you look at it from like a biological perspective, a lot of folks with trauma and chronic depression and anxiety tend to be magnesium deficient. So what's one thing I can do in this moment when I feel myself dissociating and leaving the room, or I feel myself starting to freak out? I'm married. So sometimes being in that marriage in itself can be very triggering. So when I'm like, okay, I'm starting to lash out at Dave, I'm starting to get upset, what's one thing I can do? Well, what do? I get in the shower, I take some Epsom salt, and not even a bath, because baths can be triggering for sexual assault survivors. Mm-hmm. So I take some Epsom salt, lavender infused, put it in my hand, and use it as an exfoliant to rub on my body. magnesium is best absorbed through the skin. And it provides that kind of instant grounding, like sensory tactics. So that's something that's been really helpful for me because it's very overwhelming to have memories just surface constantly.
Right.
And sometimes you just need a break.
Right. Of course. Of course. And, you said sometimes being married can be a trigger. I mean, this is very interesting because things started coming back to you just a couple of years ago, right around the time you got married.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. God bless Dave is what I always say because he is very patient with me. I was newly married and I was flooded with memories. And, I'm still fighting the good fight. I mean, it's a long battle and I'm a lot stronger than I was, but it makes intimacy hard. It makes, it makes any kind of emotional intimacy, physical intimacy very difficult. Sometimes I treat him as if he is one of my abusers. So sometimes I'm afraid of him. I dissociate. So he's really had to learn too, how to help me in grounding myself.
So let's tell our listeners about your podcast. What's the name of it?
My podcast, my new baby, so to speak. It is called Light After Trauma.
Light After Trauma. Okay. And when did you start that?
It is brand new. So the podcast just launched the end of August. It was my quarantine project.
Okay. And why did you start it?
So what happened one day as I was working with one of my clients who has an extensive history of complex trauma, she ended up overdosing. She was an inpatient after she was stabilized in the hospital. And when she came back to see me after inpatient, she had said to me that she told one of the doctors there that she had PTSD. And the doctor had said to her, no, you can't possibly have PTSD because that's only for war veterans. Those are the only folks that can have PTSD. And it was extremely invalidating for her as somebody who has had as a child who has had a history of trauma. And at that moment, and this was like 2019. So at that moment, I was like, oh no, oh no, we can't have this.
Right.
This will never do. And I knew that I needed to start having outreach to more than just the kids and the adults that were coming into my office. So at that moment, I was like, I got to do something. I got to find a way. And then quarantine hit. And then I was like, podcast, I'm doing it.
Good for you. So, so what do you do on the podcast? Do you have guests on? Is it just you?
So it's mostly guests.
Okay.
And what it is it's meant to be, it's a podcast that's meant directly for trauma survivors or even family members or partners of those who have gone through trauma. It's meant to be educational and inspirational. So I have people on there who have gone through different things and really have taken the pain and the trauma that they have been through and have used it to really make something beautiful out of their lives. And that may not necessarily be in the form of a therapist, but maybe it's somebody who started a nonprofit, things like that.
Well, not unlike yourself. I mean, what you're doing, right? Taking your experience and working as a therapist and starting this podcast, is that challenging for you? To have had your experience as a trauma survivor and, work with clients who are also trauma survivors. How do you, let me kind of fine tune that question there. With all of that, how do you keep yourself grounded? How do you manage when you're doing that with a client, when you're working with a client?
I think that's a really good question because I get that a lot. And I got that from my previous therapist a lot, which was, how could you do the work that you're doing when you are going through what you're going through? And honestly, I say, and this is not for everybody, but this is just it helps me heal. So going through what I'm going through, I get to see things from the other side. So I get to see somebody as the therapist. I get to see somebody who is in so much pain, who has been abused, who has been abandoned over and over again by one of their parents and is heartbroken. And I get to help them heal. And in a way that helps me heal because I am telling them so many of the same things that I need to be telling myself. And I say it to them and I say it to myself. So every time you help somebody heal, I end up helping myself heal, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I mean, I would also think that, I mean, obviously none of this is easy, right? When I was seeing clients, I remember there were times when I would be triggered in session and sometimes, able to manage that, sometimes not. But that's when it gets scary, right? When it becomes about you as the therapist.
Yeah. And it happens. It happens to all of us. And I am very transparent. So I will say, if I feel that I am getting triggered, or if I feel that I may be projecting, I will say to whoever's sitting in the chair across from me, listen, Sally, like I may be projecting here, but X, Y, and Z. Not in the sense that I ever make it about me, but I try to be very transparent and very open about the fact that, hey, I'm a human too. Right. And I'm going to get triggered, especially because this work is intense. Even if I don't have a history of trauma, anybody who is a trauma therapist is going to be triggered at some point. I mean, the stories that we hear are just heartbreaking. Yeah. So I acknowledge it. And I think in acknowledging it, it really helps the therapeutic relationship. There are some times where I do become triggered and I have no problem owning that.
Yeah, right. When, you talked about that time when you were young and you were eating butter. For some reason, I can't get that out of my head.
My butter story.
Your butter story. But, and then you jumped to when you were married. How did you manage? How did you survive all those years?
Butter.
literally butter.
Literally butter, so to speak. So, and I laugh about it now, but I had a very, very difficult time throughout my childhood. Lots of emotional eating, lots of sneaking food. There were times when I was a teenager and I had my own car and I would be out babysitting, where I would then afterwards take the money that I earned babysitting and I would go from Wendy's to Burger King to McDonald's, and I would just binge and binge and binge, because I was stuffing down all the feelings that were coming up that I couldn't process. I had no idea what to do with them. I really wasn't in a safe enough place to be able to process what was going on with me. And I ate. I starved.
Is it safe enough place or safe enough space? Do you mean at home wasn't a safe enough space to do that?
Yeah. Home was not. So for example, right, I had all of my physical needs met. Parents always gave me everything I needed and then some. But they weren't always the best when it came to my emotional health. So there was one time where I think I had said to my mother, like, hey, Mom, I think I have an eating disorder. Like, something's not going on. And she said, no, you don't. You're fine. And I'm like, okay, all right.
Pass the butter.
Right, exactly.
Oh,
all right, I'll be right back. I'm going to Wendy's, right? Like, so there wasn't a whole lot of acknowledgement or a whole lot of discussion around mental health or depression or anxiety. And I, from an early age, definitely showed signs of being sexually abused, but I just don't think it was discussed. Like, it was not something that was talked about in my home. I remember being in Catholic school and doing things where, looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, like I was 6 and I was lifting up my dress in class. Like nobody saw this, but I don't think it was something that was really ever talked about. So that's what I mean when I say it wasn't necessarily like emotionally safe. I didn't have the space to be able to even know, because even in just trying to talk about having an eating disorder, which is a little bit safer to talk about than sexual abuse, I was told, nah, you're fine.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And thinking about, the people, Alyssa, who are listening to this, whether they're therapists or survivors or both, or advocates or coaches, whomever, for those people who are listening to what you're saying now and maybe identifying with that a little too much and saying, you know what, I have these feelings and I don't feel safe. What do you say to them?
If they're adults or if they're kids.
If they're adults.
If they're adults. Because I think it depends on if you're a kid or if you're adult. Because if there's only so much you can do when you're a kid and you live
right.
with
Well, we're talking
family.
about the listeners of this podcast, which are mostly adults. I'm pretty think they're all adults.
So I would say that it's time to start creating your own emotional safety. That is what I did the second that I had the opportunity. I found a partner who was emotionally safe. I moved out of my home. I found a therapist who I knew was equipped to be able to help me with this kind of stuff. I let go of friends who I knew were not going to be good for me because they were always talking about diets and always on Weight Watchers and always, were never thin enough. So it's time to start creating emotional safety, and everybody has the power to do it. That doesn't mean that you can walk out and, find a husband or a wife or a partner. You don't necessarily need that. It's step by step, piece by piece. You can start to build a safe world for yourself.
Well, I think that's just awesome advice. And it just sounds like people who come to see you would really feel that safety. I can feel that.
Thank you. It's funny because I get told all the time that I'm very bubbly, and I actually feel like I come in hot. I don't feel bubbly at all, but a lot of people think I'm very bubbly and warm, and I'm like, ooh,
bubbly's. I can see how you're bubbly. I can see how you're all those things.
I also can be a strong shot of whiskey.
Let me just reintroduce you. So I'm speaking with Alyssa Scolari. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
People can go directly to my website, which is just my first and last name. So it's Alyssa, ALYSSASCOLARI.com.
Okay.
And there you can find access to my podcast and you can get in contact with me. That's the best way.
Okay. And we'll have that linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So in terms of a go-to book recommendation, whether trauma related or not, or therapist related or not, what do you have for us?
This is one of my favorite questions. Okay. So honestly, one of my favorite books of all time is David Kessler, who is the grief expert. His newest book, it's called The Sixth Stage of Grief, which is Finding Meaning. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And
wow.
I believe that especially for trauma survivors, it is so important because this is the book that it broke me open and made me realize that underneath my rage, underneath my defenses, underneath my eating disorder was grief. Grief over not being protected from my sexual abusers. And that book provided so much healing for me. And I recommend it to anybody.
Awesome. Wow. It's amazing when a book does that for you, you know, does that to you. That's awesome.
Broke me open. And I don't even have, you know, in terms of like the classic sense of the word grief, I don't have a significant death like that in my family,
Right.
but I have grief over the loss of my innocence. And that book really, really spoke to me.
Was that recommended to you?
No.
Or did you just happen to pick it up?
Quarantine, right? These are the little nuggets that have come from like the hell that has been isolation. I just stumbled upon David Kessler and it changed my life.
Awesome.
I was vacuuming one day and in a puddle of tears. He broke me open in the best way possible.
Wow. Well, this is a delight having you on here.
Thank you.
The podcast is Light After Trauma.
Yes.
Everybody go check that out. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page also. And yeah, I just love to have you back at some point. Love chatting with you, and have an awesome holiday and stay safe.
Yes. Thank you so much. You as well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
All right, everyone. I'm very excited to announce that the Trauma Therapist newsletter has finally launched. Yesterday, I sent it out to all the new subscribers. And if you're interested, you can check it out by going to the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. My goal here is to make this the go-to online resource for therapists of all kinds interested in learning about trauma and keeping up to date. Each month, we'll be looking at different modalities and conferences and events that are coming up, books and articles that are amazing, and also ones that are about to be published, workshops that are coming up. Each month we're going to spotlight a seasoned therapist. This month, I'll just give you a little sneak peek. We're looking at spotlighting Lisa Ferenz, the amazing and inspiring Lisa Ferenz. What else? I'll even be doing a behind the scenes on what it takes to keep the podcast up and running, and the newsletter up and running, and the workshops up and running. Once again, if you're interested, check it out at the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. All right.